Hello, everybody, and welcome to the LeanTossup Call of Duty League podcast. It's here, guys. We're here at Major 1, finally. It's been a little bit to get here, but we're finally at the first Major of the season, one of four. We have a special guest today, but first I'm going to introduce my co-host, CDLMetrics. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, excited. This is our first guest we've ever had on, so it
Yeah.
might be our best episode ever. It might be our worst. We'll see. But excited for the major this weekend. It has been, I feel like, a while since the season has started to finally get to our first major. So we're here. Major weekends are always fun, and let's get it kicked off.
Yeah. And to introduce our guest, it's at Doug Leibe on Twitter. He has worked with many organizations in the past and does a lot of stats for CDL and stuff on Twitter. So, yeah, welcome. How are you excited for this weekend?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. I didn't realize I was the first guest. That's awesome. Yeah, I won't claim to listen to every single episode, but I listen to you guys. You're one of the only games in town, too. So I listen to your podcast a fair bit, have for at least, I remember listening last year pretty, like, consistently or whatever, too. So it's awesome. Glad to be able to talk to you guys. You guys are, yeah, I always praise people who are, like, putting the work out in public. I certainly do it, but yeah, you guys do it to the extreme. I don't know if I could even do it to that level. So yeah, I appreciate that a lot. And yeah, it's awesome. The content that both of you guys make. I know, Robert, like, your content transcends just esports, too, that I just looking
Yeah,
into this, preparing for the show, I couldn't believe some of the other stuff that you do. It's just incredible. So yeah, I'm
yeah.
very happy to be here. I'm hoping this will lean towards a better podcast and not the worst one that you've ever done, but I can't promise anything
I'd bet on better, yes. But
on the
no,
over.
yes. No, I'll take the over. But no, I do think it is really nice to have, because I feel like the kind of Call of Duty content community was bigger, and I think it's shrunk a little bit in the last couple of years, and that's pretty sad. That it brings a little bit of a tear to my. This is a pretty fun esport. It's just that due to the way the league is set up and all this stuff, it's gotten a lot harder to do this. And I think I really like a data focused approach, right? We talk a lot about the NFL and other sports where there is a lot of this data, but in esports, specifically Call of Duty, a lot of this stuff is in its infancy. There is nowhere near the level of, at least in my opinion, or at least publicly available stuff, there's nowhere near the level of analytics that we see in other sports. And I think there is, and you're definitely a part of this, people trying to bring these analytics to esports that we see in some of the other sports. And it's a huge generational change and one I want to see. And I'd love to, I love that. I'd love to have you on as because you're a part of that. Yeah, I think we're going to talk about some of the work you've been doing in just a couple slides. So yeah, yeah, okay, there we go. We had a welcome slide. There we go. Welcome. So yeah, so talking about some of the work you've been doing, one of the newer things you've come up with, I think it was just earlier this season, you released this impact rating, right? So why don't you go ahead and explain it?
Yeah. So impact rating, I won't pretend like this is a new idea or anything earth-shattering, but I do think that most people would agree that, first off, people think that KD rules COD. It always has. It's been on the scoreboard since back when I started playing Modern Warfare, yeah, COD 4. It's the one thing that everyone sees, and I think players tie their worth to KD. Fans certainly tie players' worth to KD, to teams' worth. Everything is KD centric. And in the past, I've done some of it myself. I've seen others do it. Try to make metrics that just not ignore KD, but yeah, are separate from KD. Let's do this thing that combines these other things. But yeah, we all know that a player going 30 and 10 is not just that player having a good game. Certainly their teammates are making the game easier for them. And I always see player impact is what we're talking about. The player's influence on the map is the scale. If a team wins a game, you could, on one end, you could just give all four players 25% of the credit. And on the other hand, you could just weighted proportionally give them credit based on how many kills and deaths they got. And I think the answer everyone knows is somewhere in between those two. Some people try to make their own scale separate, but so I think impact rating, if I had to say what it's like, just sliding that scale a little bit farther from one side closer to the other side. So it's basically a combination of KD, and then it's like the novel part here is just considering the score and how many kills and how many points each kill and death lead to. So a good example is like a game where you win 250 to 100 in hardpoint. Each death you have didn't really give them that many points, even if you did die a lot. And so players that die a lot in a game that you win by 150 points, it just doesn't matter as much. And so we take KD, and we just adjust it a little. We say, okay, those deaths are just not really worth that much. And then on the other hand, I think I mentioned this in the article, and I do encourage. I put the full name, the government name of the article here, so if anybody's reading this, they can Google search it to find the article, because I know we can't do links on the actual screen. But yes, I think like the thing that the impetus for this specifically was Doug Sensor Martin going 4-22 in a game that they won by like 100 points or something like that. Okay, he did not provide any impact with his kills. He only had 4 of them. But like, how detrimental were those deaths? They clearly still skated through against a team that was fairly strong. It was just I think it was just a scrim map or something. But yeah, it's just that begs the question. Okay, KD over here is definitely not the right answer. But yeah, how much credit should Doug get for a game in which he goes 4-22? And basically my conclusion is probably not much, but more than you get if you give him just credit for his KD. And so I think impact rating tries to do that by considering the points scored. I've already made some adjustments based on the fact that in games like Control, there are only 5 points to go around. It can be a little bit more feast or famine, but yeah, at the base, it is just an adjustment to KD. And you'll see I've scaled all impact ratings to be centered around 1 being average, which is similar to what you'd expect from KD. At first, I had them as like true like impact, like the number of points this player I say should get credit for, but just makes it confusing to read across modes, and it makes it very hard to standardize. So yeah, everything is standardized. A 1.33 is 1 standard deviation better than the mean impact rating of all the players in the training set. So yeah, I think that's pretty much the basics of it. I will say Breaking Point looks like they're coming out with a rating, something that I had helped develop last year, but certainly has taken on a life of its own separately of what I had developed. So it very similar, like similar thought process, because I also had started that. But I think both of these are doing the same sort of thing, which is just trying to add a little bit more context, a little more game context or results-based context to players' score lines. Yeah, I put what's next here. I do think there's no reason to avoid or shy away from other stats that we have access to on the broadcast, albeit very few. We do know the non-traded kill percentages. We know the first deaths and first bloods and search and destroy. Like things like that can be added in. So, yeah.
And yeah, with damage there too, it is interesting, right? Because there is, I definitely feel like a need for using these more adjusted stats, because we see like games where a team will get outslayed and win. Like they'll win a hard point or maybe even win a control in some cases. Now it's rare, but it does happen though, right? And I think people are like, oh, they lost. Okay, they lost, but not really though, right? Like they lost, but they should have won. And we see this is a lot more of, say, NFL concept or call a football concept, right? Where one team will like massively outplay the other team, but due to a fumble or like an interception or something, they'll lose a game, right? Now, obviously, there's no equivalent of interception in COD, not really. Okay, you either die or you kill someone. There's no real kind of third option where you like die twice. There's nothing along that lines. So there's no real change of impact. There's no play that it basically is equivalent to an interception or a fumble. But there is still that variance of, oh, okay, they just like really efficient. They got really lucky with some spawns maybe, or something happened. And this is more along the lines of, okay, now we can actually use this to properly assess the teams. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
No, I
Good
think
for
I think
the next slide.
yeah, I know. I was just gonna say, I think you hit on at something I didn't really mention about this. Is I do think that like something, yeah, one thing I gleaned from experience playing with the players is just like how much you mentioned efficiency, like how much efficiency does come into it. Like I'd say like the thing when I first got into it, I like when I first started working with LAG, the thing that surprised me the most about playing really good teams back then, it was phase. It hasn't changed much in 4 years or whatever, but is it's just effortless for them to play, and the opposite for us. It's just hard to play. Like regardless of how talented the players are, the game is just harder to play. Every death feels like it gives them 8 points, and every kill you get feels like it gains you 10 feet on the map, and that's it. And I do think that although this is very simplistic in its execution, there is something that's maybe a bit more underlying here about it, which is that yeah, teams like FaZe tend to score more points per kill that they get. It's something I've done some research on in the past as well, that yeah, these teams that score more, that is tends to be a bit more repetitive in terms of success than just looking at points scored or yeah, the final outcome. And I think you're 100% right that fans tend to see the game as like binary, win or lose. But yeah, talk about control. Like one kill at the end of the 5th round could be the difference between winning 3-2 and losing 2-3, and that's going from 40% of the points for you to 60% of the points for you on one individual engagement. Like, and yeah, if you come away from that thinking we lost and we're bad, like, you got to watch the tape, because yeah, you're one-on-one away from it. Certainly I would always argue, oh, you should go back, why did you let it get to a one-on-one to win the game? But yeah, that's better than losing 3-1 for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you can
Yeah,
see
so
some.
I have some. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can see an example of some of the impact rating here.
Yeah, these are just some examples of some of the graphs. Yeah, I've been tweeting out for games and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just interesting to see in times, especially when like players, yeah, have outsized impact on their team's wins or better impact even when their team loses, and then the opposite too. Like I think a lot of games where players go even and lose by 100, maybe get swept under the rug, and yeah, we should maybe call them out a bit more or something. I picked Snoopy just because I think he's looked really strong this year as a rookie, someone that I personally like, and yeah, I just this is a good updated photo through their last game there.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is the important point too, right? Because obviously we're talking about this in the currently we've been talking about this in the context of picking winners and losers, right? And that is obviously we're obviously a betting podcast, and to be honest, a lot of people want to be like, what's the best team, who's going to win this game, etc. But the flip side of that is what happens when a team is not winning. How do you figure out who the problem, quote unquote, is? Who is the overperforming player? Which players are underperforming? How do you make that better, right? And I think because right now, currently, the way it seems to be decided, at least, is just KD. It's just they have a bad KD, so they're gone, right? And I think that's an overly simplistic view of it. I think this is, in many ways, the issue that this is what Toronto, at least, has looked like, right? Because they had issues, obviously, they got rid of Standy, then they brought in Hicksy, then Hicksy didn't have a great KD, so they're like, oh, okay, maybe. And they had a really good run there. They made the championship game last year, but they lost it. And I think in the offseason, they decided to go, instead of keeping Hicksy, they decided to upgrade to Envoy. Now, to be fair, that is definitely on paper an upgrade, and it currently seems to be working fine for them. Again, we have no doubt on how it would have been if Hicksy had been there instead of Envoy, right? Seems to be working out for them, but the question is, does that actually make sense? And I think using these impacts and these kind of more advanced stats, we can actually figure out if that was the correct decision or not.
Yeah, yeah, you mentioned the counterfactual there. We can't know how they would have done. Last year I became obsessed with the like basically with or without you type stats in hardpoint. Like when we still had kill by kill data, you could know who was alive when and how much impact they had. Because yeah, as much as I would say that a player's kills don't win or lose the game, and yeah, Hicksy having a low KD has almost nothing to do with Toronto's success or failure, I would say on the other hand that team level kills is a really strong indicator. As much as you can find a couple examples of teams that won games even with a low, like a sub 1 KD, like if you're not getting kills, it is hard to win the game without kills. So I was just obsessed over the summer with, okay, yeah, like when Hicksy's alive, is his team getting more kills than when he's dead, relative to the fact that they would be down a man if he was dead. And I thought there's some really interesting work there, but then when I found out there wasn't going to be kill level data again this year, it was like, okay, great. I just sunk like a month or two into these sorts of but I do think I felt like I was getting close to not the holy grail, but just yeah, it's what you're saying. It's we can I wasn't taking into account who the player who got the kill was, just like, is this player alive or not in this second, and did that second have a kill for their team or a death for their team or how many or whatever. And like that, it just like when I did that, like some of the stuff that I saw was incredible. I wish I could go more into it, but yeah, it's pointless to talk about it because yeah, we can't get that data anymore. But at least for now. But hopefully in the future, I do think that's the next frontier for yeah, like determining. And we can talk about this from a betting perspective too. We're starting to see some team changes finally, or not finally. I shouldn't say that. It's been early. We're already starting to see some team changes, and yeah, how do you price a team that has two players on it like Carolina that haven't played before or something like that? It would be really helpful, even if you didn't know how good those players were going to be, to know how detrimental the players that you're losing are. Like if Real is the best player on the team, I'm adjusting my prior a little bit, and now these players coming in, I'm going to be a little lower on Carolina, or the opposite. And so I do think this has huge betting implications as well, outside of just how good is the team. We see all these team changes. It's the thing at the beginning of the year that I struggle the most with. It's like, every team is brand new. And even if they're not brand new, they're playing all brand new teams. So like, how can I possibly get a good grip on what's going to happen?
Hmm.
Yeah, one thing, if
Yeah.
I could just jump in real
Oh, go
quick,
ahead. Go ahead.
Robert.
Yeah.
I just want to make a quick comment about KD being an overrated stat because I think it absolutely is at the player level, like you mentioned before, Doug. It's interesting because the players that have good KDs often have good KDs. Every now and then you'll have a bad map here or a good map for a bad player, but at a team level, I do think KD matters quite a bit. And if you look, and you mentioned it as well, like hardpoint data, the team that gets more kills often wins the game more than they don't. And if you outslay by a lot, you're going to win by a lot. And it matters even more in Search and Destroy, where a kill is essentially like 25% of a round win. If you want to, it's not exactly that, but basically. So at the team level, I do think it matters. I often think of KD just to continue our other sports references. I'm bringing baseball into this now. KD to me is like batting average used to be for baseball, or maybe what OPS was when that was first created. It was like this at a glance stat that anyone could look at and go, okay, I know what a good batting average is, or I know what a good OPS is, and assign that to the player. And then over time, we created WAR and defensive WAR and all this stuff so we could really narrow down the value of the player. I love that impact rating is taking into account like wins and losses and how much you won by, because yeah, a lot of times there are bad teams where there are certain players who have really good games, and how much does that matter in the long run? Are they just playing slow, trying to get kills wherever they can? Or on the flip side, are they running around recklessly, not with their teammates, things like that? On the other hand, teams that win a lot, even if you have a player who doesn't put up kills and dies a lot, is he affecting spawns? Is he doing a good job of sitting in the hill or picking up first bloods or giving information? Stuff like that. I love what you're doing here. Keep up the good work, and I cannot wait to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Yeah, it's all context. I think that's, yeah, batting average doesn't provide any context. It makes it seem like every hit's the same, and even the casual baseball fan realized that pretty quick, that a double's better than a single. And yeah, the thing we have, the problem was that we don't even have that much context to add. In baseball, they had all this data going back 100 years, and they just weren't doing much with it. And so, yeah, it was nice for us. Yeah, we're blessed and cursed. Like, we're cursed to know how good everyone else. I think Robert said that. Like, we know how good it can be, and I do think there is some danger in trying to skip steps a little bit too. I see that a little in the scene in general. Is like people trying to skip steps and like, go to this next level of analytics where, yeah, like we're still hand taking kill and death stats off the scoreboard so that Breaking Point can post them because the CDL doesn't even give them to us on their own website. You got to have some perspective sometimes. But yeah, speaking of context, I know the next slide, I had a question for you guys to get you guys both get your takes on this a little bit. But I'm curious, like we talk about, yeah, how we can add context, and damage I think has become pretty, it's been talked about a lot more. I've personally been fairly surprised. It was something that we've had, I think Black Ops 4 was the first COD that we started talking about damage, because yeah, health went up to 150, and I think they started putting it on the score. Yeah, it was in Black Ops 4 for sure, because that was the time where Temp had a control that went to round 5 that he had like 8,000 damage and everyone was freaking out. And I do think that like you guys would both probably agree that like you would, I think just based on how I think you see the game, like you go like, went to round 5, so of course he had 8,000. I always laugh at stats that are like the most kills or whatever. It's like, yeah, I want to see the most kills per round or the most kills per minute or something, because yeah, like it's a little easier when the game is super long because your team is not winning. But yeah, so I digress. Damage has become a lot more talked about, and I do think that I've actually, so actually on the first of my pages, I put a link to an article about introducing S&D damage efficiency. I had looked even back then in Black Ops 4 and shown that teams that got more kills per point of damage in search won much more often. And I think it's very intuitive that if you get damage in S&D but it doesn't turn into a kill, not only did you not get the kill, but you've given information to the other team about where you are. And yeah, we saw a clear negative correlation between basically healed off damage and losing, or in winning was the negative correlation. But I'm curious your guys' thoughts on this in Respawn, because I included just this is just like an attention grabber highlight on the next slide of a game where I think Scrap went -5, but he had the same amount of damage as other players on the team that had many more kills. And so I know breaking point rating takes into account damage. So you see his breaking point rating is much higher. 15 and 20, but had more damage than both Insight and CleanX here by by a hair. And then like my rating, which doesn't consider damage, I have him a bit lower. But I'm curious your take on this from like a predictive standpoint, like how much does damage add context here? And then also just from like your personal perspective as well. Do you think that talking about damage is something that's helped the conversation, or just a net neutral? Or just curious. I just think it's something that we're going to start talking about a lot more, especially with breaking point rating coming out and being so tied to damage. There are going to be more of these types of scores. It did not take me very long to find this one, just randomly searching, so it will happen.
Yeah. I guess I'll go first on that. I haven't figured out the best way to incorporate it yet, but I actually think damage is extremely important in all this. I kind of view damage as like the way you would view it's like in football where there's like a drive that goes really far, but then something bad happens, like there's an interception or a fumble or a missed field goal, or you don't convert a fourth down. It's like you went most of the way there, but then you just weren't able to convert it. And I think there is I hadn't thought about that point in the non-respawns in SND, where if you try to kill someone and then you don't kill them, then they know where you are and it actively hurts you in that round. But I feel like in respawns, and I haven't actually done this correlation yet, and I want to. I haven't had the time to, but because I haven't actually reliably been able to have the damage numbers, because sometimes this stuff is available and sometimes it's not available. With Breaking Point is now doing a good job with having this all available, and that's good. But at times it has not been available. But I feel like it's a lot more important, and I feel like because although Scrap's by your impact rating, his impact rating is lower. Your impact rating is technically weighted higher it rewards a kill more than it rewards not a kill, if that makes sense. But damage is, especially in a respawn, it's just, okay, he tried to kill that person, but something bad happened and he couldn't kill that person. Maybe he was like trying to kill someone, but then someone else killed him, maybe a team kill, maybe a grenade went off, right? Like he was doing the right thing, but just something stopped him. And I feel like doing the right thing that would eventually lead to a kill is better indicative of future success rather than not doing that, if that makes sense.
That's a really good point. That makes a lot of sense to me. I hadn't really thought about that. I like the football analogy a lot because it's a good example of the same thing. And this isn't to say, and I conflated the two a little bit, that like just because the damage per kill for Scrap is high, like more damage per kill, that's not to say that those kills weren't finished by his teammates. You can see just looking at scanning the other ones, Envoy 18 kills on 2300 damage. Envoy might have been the beneficiary, and I just spent the last 5 minutes talking about how it's all about if your team can convert those into kills. So maybe some sort of adjustment for like team level damage per kill conversion to dictate, okay, you don't get, if your team was really bad at converting damage to kills, then if you had a lot of damage, that's not as impressive. But if your team was really good at it and you had a ton of damage and not a lot of kills, okay, maybe I should give you more credit. I like that a lot. I think that's a good way to think about it too, because it could have been the teammate getting the kill too, and I just ignore that possibility.
One of the things I had thought about for this was that you would do, and I was trying to figure out what I was like, this would just take longer, so I didn't do it. But if you adjusted kills based on damage, so for example, if you say, 3,500 damage, that equates to, say, something, it's, a kill is 70 damage. It's not exactly 150, it'd be slightly higher, right? Because you have to adjust for it. So basically, 3,500 damage is 3,500 divided by 170, right? So it's actually this many kills, and then you adjust it accordingly. But then you could also adjust the entire scoreboard that way as well. Then you could be like, actually, Ultra only won this by 10 kills, but actually they should have won it by 20 kills if you adjust it for damage. To say, actually, Ultra was way, way better. Okay, they already won it. Maybe they won it by 20, but actually they should have won it by 50.
Yeah, I think it's tough that, like, in your example there, is that they should have won it by 50, or that is the takeaway that they were bad at finishing those kills, so we should penalize them. That's the part that's interesting to me is, okay, if the average team would have done this and then they get below average, we know there's going to be some variance in the actual final scores relative to the average. But is that because the team was bad, or is it just normal variance? Is it it's interesting. But another good point, I think, for sure, that it could be it's probably some of both.
The way I viewed Yeah, the way I view damage is it always needs to be paired with something else, whether that's kills. If it's paired with kills, you can see how efficient you are doing with your damage. And that can go on a player-to-player basis. So you can see, okay, if someone is not putting in a lot of damage, but they're getting in a lot of kills, okay, they're picking up a lot of trades and not dying. And that's good, that's valuable. And on the flip side, if someone is putting in a ton of damage, but they can't convert to kills, I think it's important to maybe look at their assist column to see, was that damage picked up by somebody else? So maybe you pair kills and assists with the damage. If you do it if you compare damage to deaths, obviously you can see how much damage you're doing before you die. That maybe would be more valuable in a respawn mode. The debate about damage and how valuable it is in search, I think is really interesting because, Doug, you mentioned if you're putting in damage on some other player on the map in a search game, but your initial damage doesn't get the kill, essentially you've given away your position, and it's a trade-off that I think it's still a good thing because you've maybe given away your position, but you've called out another enemy, and ideally you're telling your teammate, like, this guy is one shot behind the barrel or whatever, and that guy is also hurt. So, you're suppressing his ability to do anything on the map at that point. His number one job is just survive and get back with his teammates or whatever, get behind smoke, whatever it might be. So I think it's obviously putting in damage is good whenever you can do it. I still think it is valuable in a search game because you're at least forcing the pressure onto them. You're gaining map control, you're turning it into a 4v3 or making the other team to react to where you are now. So, yeah, it's interesting because it can be used in so many different ways depending on the game mode, but it's something I've looked into a bunch. Like, does kill efficiency matter more than how much damage you get before you die? There's a lot of work to be done there, but there's for sure a place for it.
Yeah. No, I think, and the one caveat I thought of when you were talking about this, I wrote this about Black Ops 4. You know what was different about Black Ops 4? We had stim. You could get a kill and to get damage, and you said, this guy, you know where he is, and he's weak. Bad news, in Black Ops 4, he wasn't weak. He just pops stim and instantly gets back to full health. So, that is different now. That guy is weak for a full 5 seconds after the last tag, and so that probably plays a big role. I think the big difference in Search is just that, like, you're much less likely, all else equal, to have two players shooting the same player at the same time. Where in Respawn, if you get a lot of damage, chances are someone else is going to be team shotting with you, or at least, the odds are a lot better. But that is one thing that maybe this would be worth revisiting because, Black Ops 4, it was a whole different animal. It was 5-on-5 as well, but everybody had stim. It was just like getting bullets and not getting the kill was like essentially nothing because they just stim. You have to do it twice before it really made a difference.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk about the major in just 1 second, but we're going to do a quick update on the race to 1580. So just for people who are unfamiliar with this, basically at the start of the season, CDLMetrics and I drafted teams. We basically both drafted 6 teams, and currently I do have the lead. I'll open it up a little bit here, but still, though, again, whether or not FaZe wins the major, whoever wins the major between FaZe and Toronto and whoever, that's going to really determine because it doesn't have a huge, the difference in the weights between LAN and non-LAN points, not really that big of a deal for each team in terms of it, but I feel like in this competition it's going to have a massive impact, a much bigger weighted impact in this competition. Okay, so just a quick recap of our picks last week. Not great. We both went 1-2. This one sucked. They should have. That was frustrating. But again, that was a good call, though. I don't know what the hell's up with Optic. Yeah, it's just we both got burned by Optic there. And you cashed this one. But then Minnesota was randomly good last week. Just a bit
which I was happy about. As a Rocker fan, I was like very happy to see they got winners bracket, but just surprised that LAG
hedge there.
I was surprised that
if
LAG
I had bet on the Chiefs in the
we did go head to head
beside Buffalo, so
we did go head to head with our number 2 picks with New York and Boston, and there was a way where we both could have hit that, but that was the one I got, thankfully. Optic was obviously horrible. They didn't win a map last weekend. The map 1 against Atlanta, it looked so good for so long, and Atlanta just keeps getting away with squeaking out hard points like it's nothing. I think they won by 50. Yeah, that was close, but it doesn't matter. And yeah, your Carolina pick was brilliant. So kudos to you.
It was weird because the model, and it was weird too. Because remember we were talking about it last week, and I was like, "Oh, the model weirdly likes Minnesota against LAG. Huh, that's weird." And I'm like, "That can't." And they just destroy them. I'm like, "What? It doesn't make any sense." I was like, "This is weird." Same thing with Carolina, but yeah, no, it was phase with hardpoint. We talk about them in a second. It's weird though because like their hardpoint is weak, but then after it was hardpoint, they just annihilated Optic. Optic was competitive for the rest of the series after we got out of the map 1 hardpoint, and that's concerning for Optic, but also I think there is some weakness there for FaZe in terms of that. All right, news of the week. Obviously, we've got the major. Here is your bracket. Actually, shout out to Doug here. You actually were basically calling. You had like most likely bracket throughout, and you called that one pretty right. Like you had a lot of these basically nailed the entire time. So, good job there.
I'm just glad that I didn't make any. As far as I know, there were no tiebreaker mistakes, or like I tweeted out the thread of every team in the last day what they needed. And I think they were all accurate, which is I don't think I've ever done it a whole weekend of the pre-major qualifiers, like the one weekend before, and not had one either typo or mistake that's caused like some whole fan base of people to be pissed that like I told them if they won they definitely make winners, but actually it's a 7-way tie and like it wasn't taking into account opponents' map strength of schedule or something. Like, so I'm really glad that it went very smoothly. And yeah, it was funny to look back. Like the most likely bracket I tweeted out starting Sunday ended up being the one that was final. Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm happy with that. Sad to see what the bracket looks like, but I'm happy that the coverage leading up to it was good. Sad for my Gorillas. I don't like where they're hanging out in this bracket.
It's so funny, and we'll obviously get to the picks later, but what I do is I use my model to simulate all these games, so I obviously simulate all the winners bracket games, and then I then simulate every possible losers bracket games. And this is like the first time ever when it's, if this team ends up in the loser bracket, they have a 99.9% chance of win. It's just, for these loser bracket teams, you either have 0% chance or 50% chance of winning these matches. It's so funny. It's like, it's never been that night and day before, and we are at a point where these are the best teams, and then there's everybody else. And it is such a stark difference between FaZe and Toronto even. Obviously, Subliners is up there, but they're, like, I'd say them and Miami are a tier down from those as well. It's crazy just the sheer difference between the top and the bottom of the league, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Not just, I think there's obviously FaZe and Ultra are the teams that invest the most next to, say, Optic in the league. They have the best resources, the best coaching staff. They use a lot of the analytics. Other teams, some of them didn't even exist a year ago. Some of them are brand new. Some of them have been locating. Some of them are trying to do budget bin. But some of them are trying to do more analytics and more Moneyball. Cough, Seattle. And I like that. Yeah, I think there is... But you could definitely see the teams that are like, we're just here to not get fined, and the teams that are like, we're trying to actually win. Okay.
I've actually got an interesting nugget about the bracket. It's actually 3 interesting nuggets, and I don't know if I'm going to rain on anyone's parade here, but if you look at the winners bracket games, and you look closely, you might notice that all of those are rematches from the Major 1 qualifiers, where the higher seeded team won every one of those games. Atlanta FaZe swept Gorillas, Miami just swept Optic, Toronto won 3-1 against Surge, I think, in December. I think it was 3-1. Yeah, and New York beat Rocker as well. So those are all rematches where the higher seeded team won, but there's more. If the higher seeded team wins all of those matches, so that would be Atlanta, Miami, Toronto, and New York, Atlanta would play Miami, which I guess that one hasn't happened. So forget one of the nuggets, but if...
I see where you're driving, though.
Hold on, did I do this?
I like where you're going.
I think I did this right. Yes, if the losers go down to losers bracket, the lower seeded teams go down to losers bracket, we would have Gorillas versus Thieves, which is a rematch.
Yeah.
We would have Optic versus Legion, which is a rematch. Surge versus Breach is a rematch, and Rocker versus Ravens also a rematch. A lot of rematches. I was going to say FaZe and Miami, but I don't think that's happened yet. But Toronto, New York would also be a rematch. A lot of potential rematches.
Texas and Miami. If you flip Texas and Miami, then you'd have Atlanta, Texas, Toronto, New York would also all be rematches.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, Toronto
yes.
played New York too. Yeah. So that would be what, 4, 6, 10 rematches in a row, basically, to start. That would be impressive.
Yeah, just an interesting nugget. I thought with more major qualifiers, I think that'll happen more often. But to see a potential 9 rematches is crazy. But that's it.
Yeah.
Those are the fun facts.
Okay. So do you have anything you want to say about the hardpoint margin of victories here?
This is just a change of what I've been sharing over the last few weeks. This is just by map margin of victory. What I had been showing before was margin of victory for each game mode over the past several years and then throwing this year's data into it. And it's something I wanted to ask you guys about my model, because my model looks at margin of victory and it's the main metric that it looks at for each team. And I don't weight a team's performance based on the map that they play, and I think I might want to moving forward, because you have maps where it's just much more common for a team to win by margin. If you look at Skid Row there, it's on average 23 points higher than a typical terminal game. So I think I should adjust my numbers accordingly so that teams that win on Skid Row by 100 or 120 get even bigger rewards, if that makes sense. Like, they're rewarded even more in my model than a team that wins by 51 on a terminal. That's the team that wins by a huge margin anyway is going to get that bump, but maybe make it even more dramatic based on how the map plays out. So that's just where we're at with margin of victory. I also wanted to throw it up there because a lot of these might change going into the Major 2 qualifiers, because there are new hills on 4 of these 5 maps, maybe new spawn locations as well. So just take a look at it now, because come February, March, it might look a lot different. But that's just all I had listed for these next 3. Yeah, you can see the hardpoint margins there. The search margins are a little tighter, and I expect them to all equal out as we get further into the season. And then the control margin of victory, like, there's one clear defensive favored map in Invasion. And again, maybe that gets subbed out at some point for a better control map where you have a better chance of winning on offense. But yeah, for now, I just thought it was interesting to show these maps and see where the maps stand right now.
It's very interesting. I think the way that I have modeled, although as I prefaced with you guys yesterday, like I have a model that's more like an elo based point level model, which doesn't consider the different map margin of victory. So like winning by X amount of points is just getting a higher percentage of the points regardless of the map. And things like this make me go, are obvious flaws. Like, I've always known that a flaw in a model like that is that it doesn't consider the correlation between points. Like, you're much more likely to get the 20th point of the game if you got the 19th point in a hard point, and then the opposite on the 59th point and the 60th point or whatever. But I don't know, it's interesting to see this. I've never seen such a discrepancy in the past. I will say that the reason that I haven't started really using my model yet is I've done some work in past years about, like, when do map level trends become more predictive, and I've always used a rule of thumb of around 20 games before we start to see some leveling out in these stats. And so we're, as you can see in these numbers, other than Invasion, we're not quite there yet, and I'm just a little cautious. But if this does continue, that certainly gives me something to think about, like how I could be adjusting. Not just a team that wins by 150 on terminal is better than a team that wins by 150 on Skid Row potentially. I don't know, it's interesting. I don't have the answer, but it's really made me like scratch my head a little bit that it's a lot. I will say one other interesting little tidbit is just that I know they do this in football, where they look at if you flipped every score that was less than X or something like that, how much does that correlate with a team's success in the future, and like basically try to find that number at which the scores below that, it's like more of a toss up than anything or whatever. I've looked into it in Hardpoint a little bit, but I don't know, it's just like another another thing that I think would be interesting little exercise here. Would just be like, because it's not 60 points because you don't score 60 on average in hardpoint, but I've always found that number to be, yeah, somewhere in the mid 40s. If you win by less than 40, like you were just one rotated hill away from like potentially the opposite outcome. And then like on the converse, if you win by more, like that's more impressive than winning by 40. But yeah, I don't know, just a couple interesting thoughts. But yeah, that's a really interesting find there.
And Robert, you can just flip through the search and
Yeah,
control quickly if you wanted to
search.
scan those. But
Some differences here. It seems high ride is pretty competitive, but
yeah, and
apparently
that
schedule
may
is
also
not.
be due. Yeah, that may be due to, again, defensive favored maps in theory should have tighter margins of victory. But again, the sample size on a lot of these maps is pretty small, so over time I expect all of these to normalize out to about 3 margin on search. And then, yeah, the control maps, there's 2 pretty decent ones that I think will stay in the rotation. And then there's Invasion, which is just, it sticks out like a sore thumb because so many games go to round 5 and defense is king on that map. It is what it is for now, but maybe we can sub it out at some point.
And then control, which
I
is
think we
unfortunately the least interesting graph. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I
okay.
feel like I don't know if I have the
Oh,
data exactly, but like I think offense typically starts to do better, and that is the one saving grace I think that Invasion might have is that and when the game starts off and it's new, it's always defense. Defense reigns supreme because you just hold angles and get kills on unsuspecting players. Where I do feel like, if I remember correctly, that's what happened with Gavutu, where it was like when they also that was the year they also added the tick counting, which helped a lot. But yeah, that map was unplayable at the beginning of the game. It was so defensive favored. And then teams realized, okay, you got to throw some change ups in. You can't just run at the more favored site over and over until you get it and then run to the unfavored one until you die and lose. And that is my one hope. I always hold out hope on these sad control maps that by midseason or the end, there'll be some more interesting offenses that teams can run and they won't be just so miserable to watch. And yeah,
we're starting to see that. We saw some offensive captures on Invasion. Most notably, Carolina versus FaZe. That was nuts. I was like, what? But they pulled it out. I think they had win 2 offenses, didn't they? Against FaZe on Invasion. It was crazy. They definitely had to win 1, but yeah, it's slowly becoming more competitive. It's not there yet, but it's getting there. All right, match preview. So we actually only have 4 matches to preview this week. Obviously, we only have 4. But we'll maybe talk, I think, a little bit about who we think is going to win the tournament. Starting off with a priced-in blowout. FaZe minus 2,500 on the money line. So just for reference, again, you would have to bet $2,500 to win $100. Sometimes it's nice to just say that number because that's how insane it is.
easy money.
Yeah. LAG plus 800 on the money line. FaZe minus 2.5 minus 125. LAG plus 2.5 minus 110. Map 1 spread is 43.5 minus 1.5 in the search, and then minus 1.5 minus 200 in the control. I feel like this is basically unplayable because FaZe is definitely going to win this somehow. But at the same time, you can't play that much. It's weird because of the 2 kind of massive favorites, I feel like this is the one, the minus 2.5, that you can't play because FaZe is a liability there in hardpoint, right? They could just straight up lose the hardpoint, right? You're basically betting, you're getting minus 125 that they win the hardpoint, which isn't great, right? Because you could just get LAG plus like 43.5, right? I feel like there's a lot better ways to approach this rather than just hanging everything on the minus 2.5, or definitely not the money line, right? I don't know. You maybe could throw in something like you could maybe parlay the FaZe. I'm not sure if you can parlay map spreads or not, but like the FaZe minus 1.5 in the at minus 165 isn't the most unattractive. Maybe you could parlay that with something else. What are your thoughts on this? We'll go to Doug first.
Yeah, no, I don't know, I think it's a trap game. I don't know, it's very interesting to me the way that this major, from like a betting perspective, how this first major has gone compared to last year's first major. Like I remember that Breaking Point was tweeting out those graphs of all like the celebrity or like the celeb picks, and then they had the Bet 365 favorites one and the Bet 365. Oh no, it was Bet 365 underdogs, and they
Mm-hmm.
won more than half the time or whatever. And it's just like Major One last year was just like everything up in the air. And then this year, I bet if they had done that again, it would have been like the opposite. It just felt like everything went so smoothly. Yeah, like you said, FaZe, despite winning by 20 points, just kept winning every single time. Their search and destroy round win rate is like what, like 70% or something right now. It just everything went exactly the way the script writers said. And so I don't know. To me, it just seems, yeah, like my model is typically much more conservative before it names a team a superstar team. And like right now, yeah, the bookmakers have Atlanta as just, yeah, the 96 Bulls or whatever. It's just like they can do no wrong. And it's just, I don't know. I had one of my picks being that Lag takes a map here. Like, yeah, I don't think it's like incredibly likely, but I do think, yeah, I like the odds that you're getting that LEG either steals a search. I personally hold that search is fairly random still. The best round win rate of a team over a full season is sub 60%. So like anything can happen on a one game basis. And yeah, I don't know. I stick to that number a lot. I think that's the most likely one. But as we've been talking about with Hardpoint, I also like, you wouldn't surprise me if you woke me up from a coma and said that LEG managed to steal a Hardpoint on sub base or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Doug here. And like I mentioned before, this is a rematch, as is every winner's bracket round 1 game. And FaZe did 3-0 LAG back on January 12th. I think at first glance you go, okay, FaZe 3-0'd them, minus 125 to sweep isn't that bad. They're the best team in the game. It's a comfortable pick to make, I think, for the average fan. But I agree. I think the plus 2.5 on the LAG side has some value. If you just look back at that series, and you brought up the map, Doug, sub-base hardpoint, LAG lost by 20, which sub-base is one of those maps where the margin of victory is pretty tight because it's just chaotic. But Atlanta they just win by 20 every game. I think eventually that will come back to bite them. Maybe it's on sub-base, maybe LAG throw a different hardpoint map in there. The search wasn't really close. It was 6-2, but like Doug said, search is fluky. I still fully expect Atlanta to win that, but they could have one bad map. And then control, I remember watching that control. It was a 3-2 victory for FaZe, and LAG was like a kill away in round 5 from taking offense and winning that game. It came down to the wire and very much in control and somewhat in hardpoint. I think given another go around, I think LAG can scratch out one of those maps and at least force a game 4. Yeah, they're not going to win.
Outslayed in that map 1 too.
Yeah,
they outslayed by a good amount too, I think.
Yeah, they got a fighter's chance. I don't think they're going to win the series, but like a FaZe 3-2 would not shock me at all in this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think the minus 2.5 is definitely a trap there. I think the best shot is probably the hard point, which is, hey, plus 400 to win a hard point isn't that bad, right? I definitely don't hate mine, plus 43.5 there. So I think that's the way to attack it, but you also make good points for trying to attack it in the search as well. Moving on to the second match of the day, Minnesota versus Subliners. Subliners, again, a pretty sizable favorite here, minus 334. Minus 1.5, minus 138. Where have we seen that line before? Subliners, 17.5 point favorites in the hard point, 1.5 round favorites in the search, and then 1.5 round favorites in the control. This one is really iffy. I think I bet this one already. I think I bet Minnesota in this one already, I think. I actually bet Minnesota plus 1.5. I think I got that at plus 150. I think. I don't hate Minnesota here. I have this as basically a pick. I have this as basically 50-50. I have New York's 55% favorites. Minnesota's 45% favorites. I have New York favored in the hard point, but then everything else looks pretty good for Minnesota. It's weird that I'm praising this Minnesota team, but it's not horrible. They seem to be doing something, and I think New York is maybe just a little bit questionable right now. So I don't hate Minnesota here. I think Minnesota has a shot to take this to 5 games, and then if they get it to a search, they have a shot to win it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Okay, I agree. Last time these teams played, they split hard points, and Minnesota's not a bad hard point team. New York is pretty good, though, but like a plus 150, I think that's some value. I also think there's some value in the control at plus 162. New York is just they're not good at that mode. Not saying that Minnesota is good either, but to hang a number that big in a mode that I think New York is 2-5 in control this year, I don't know. I think Minnesota to cover a map and a half is decent, or just to win outright in map 1 or map 3. Either of those I think makes sense. New York has been very good at search this year. A lot of round 11s though. I wouldn't be super comfortable taking them like minus 1.5 in map 2. And the minus 188 is a little too high to win outright for my taste. Yeah, for me, it's also Minnesota or nothing.
Yeah, I think the combination of quote unquote luck, we won't say it, luck and search that they've had, combined with that being game 5 luck, is they're 3-0 in game 5, right? Like it's that's yeah, I probably share both of your skepticism over New York at these prices. Yeah, it seems they're a bit more favored. On the other hand, though, I'm not super convinced, and this is just more my personal opinion. I think my mod would probably agree with what you guys said, and end of story or whatever. But I don't know. I haven't been that impressed with Minnesota so far. Yeah, they beat Lag and they came into that game as dogs. Being underdogs to LAG 1 week ago is just not something that sets up like for success, I think, in general. They did better in that game than I was expecting and looked really good, and then they managed to take the victory against Seattle 3-2. But yeah, I don't know. I'm high on Seattle, but again, yeah, I don't know. When I look at the comparators here, I'm not. Yeah, I need Minnesota to show me something else before I am like really jumping on the Minnesota bandwagon. That said, though, yeah, I'm happy to take map 2 money line here for sure. Even hardpoint, I'm not even that scared of for Minnesota. I think that New York's probably a bit propped up by their game 5 record and their search. Yeah, man, 7-1 with a 56% round win rate is crazy. That's not going to stay like that forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Minnesota needs to show us some stuff, but subliners have at times they've looked really good, but at times have been really unimpressive. So we need to see something from subliners here too as well. Map game 3 here, Toronto minus 800 on the money line, not getting nearly the same respect as FaZe against LAG. Seattle plus 450, minus 2.5 plus 150 for terms of map spreads. Map 1, Toronto minus 44.5 point favorites in the hard point, 1.5 round favorites in the search, and then 1.5 round favorites in the control. Yeah, I don't understand why this isn't. Okay, I understand the fact that like when you get to progressively, the difference between minus 800 and minus 2500 isn't a lot, but I think this should be a lot closer to the minus 2500 to be fair. I don't hate taking a little taste of the minus 2.5 at plus 150. If you said you can only bet one of the Toronto Ultra minus 150 or the FaZe minus 150, you said, okay, same price, I would 100% take the Ultra one here. I think there's a better chance of Ultra sweeping. Like, this Ultra team is really good. I think they're basically equivalent to FaZe, but the market is treating them like they're not. Toronto is terrifying in hardpoint. God, that was And, like, okay, yeah, randomly they kept it close with Las Vegas, which is weird, but even then they made a lot of really good plays. It was a sub base, so it did get a little closer there, but they probably should have covered the spread in that game. They didn't, unfortunately, but they probably should have covered the spread in that hard point. Obviously they beat them. I think they beat Las Vegas 3-1, but yeah, this team is really good, and bring on FaZe versus Ultra. I'm ready for that round 1. That they're definitely playing this major, so I'm excited for that.
Doug, you want to go on this one?
Yeah. No, I don't have a ton of. I agree with you, Robert. I think that seems about right. I do think that, as we've mentioned with the control, I think the one thing that not stands out but might be interesting here is plus 1.5 map 3 is just basically saying, are we going to play invasion or not? I don't know. I haven't looked into the map vetoes enough, but like the savvy part of me says, let me look at that and see what I think the map vetoes are going to be here, because I like this going to round 5 a lot more if we're getting a map like Invasion, our previous conversation on, like the dynamics of that map. So I don't know. That is the one thing, but I agree. I think Toronto is. I think we all know that the reason they're a little priced a bit lower is that 0-3 to Boston really just made everybody so scared that they can't win or whatever, like they could lose on demand or something. But yeah, when I watch them, they look as scary as FaZe does for sure.
Yeah, and I think the 44.5 for Toronto in the hard point is like they could cover that easily. If they're not winning by 100, it feels like it's a disappointing hardpoint performance from them. Like, they are just consistently blowing out teams. And we saw against New York, which was their first, like, real deal match of the year. Like, New York scored 92 against them. Like, they just dominate hardpoint right now. So if I'm going to look anywhere, it would be Toronto minus 44.5, probably. But again, control, I actually think there's a little bit of value on Seattle. The map vetoes, Doug, you mentioned, is it an invasion, is it not? I think we're definitely not playing high rise. Seattle has yet to play that this year, and Toronto are 0-2 on the map. 5-0 on the other two maps, and Seattle is not great at control, but I don't know, control is fluky with the fact that there's only 5 rounds maximum anyway. If you're feeling risky, the plus 275 isn't bad, but yeah, if you're thinking it's an invasion, the plus 110 seems really smart. That's where I lean. I think Toronto handled them easily, but probably in a 3-1 fashion as opposed to a sweep. So that's where I'm at on that one.
Toronto is like the prototypical 3-1 team. They're the team that could win every game all season 3-1, I think. And it wouldn't always be the same mode, but yeah, their slaying is just so Scrap is incredibly good at slaying, and adding Envoy too. And as long as he's not getting another one of those whatever game, that might be like the worst game I've ever seen in person to remember. It just was horrible. So assuming he's woken up, yeah, they're winning every series 3-1. They have one lull, and then Scrap drops 45 in a control, and then they win or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Last game of Thursday, definitely not the weekend. Optic versus Miami. Optic is somehow the favorite in this game. -1, even despite the fact that they just got 3-0'd by this team last week. -188 on the money line. -1.5 spread in the maps. 23.5 point favorites map 1. 1.5 round favorites map 2. And then 1.5 round favorites map 3. This one is weird. I don't believe in this Optic team. I've got this one as another 50-50. I already took Miami here. I know there's a lot of hype on Optic, and here's the thing. If you take away the Optic team from this name, are they favorites in this game? I think no. I think the only reason they're favorites here is because their name is Optic, and people are going to bet on them because they're Optic. Seriously, that's it. If not, this game would be probably even. And I'll take that all day. The thing is, there is a question as to how these teams will perform on LAN versus not, because last year was always like, oh, we have all these online qualifiers, and then stuff happens in the online qualifiers, and then you go to LAN, and then everything changes, which was very weird. I don't know if this team is going to be better on LAN. I don't know how good this team is. I think there's some problems with this team. It's definitely not Pred per se. It's just this team is just not there. I can't pin down exactly what the problem is yet. I haven't really looked into it too much, but it's just I don't see this team as one of the best teams, and I think Miami's even with them. That's how I view it. Doug, how do you feel?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the two things weighing here is I think looking at the underlying stats, I can see why Optic stands out in a couple spots, and that may be because it's what we went back to before. It's if the average team like Optic's KD in search right now is 1.13, despite having the 6th best round win percentage in search right now. And yeah, so the question that I brought up earlier is, does that mean that they're underperforming, or does that mean that they're due for some regression to the mean there, and that they're getting the kills in these search rounds, but they're just not getting them in the right order to win as many rounds? And so in that respect, I say, okay, Optic might be a little better than people are giving credit. But on the other hand, obviously we have a less than 1 week old head-to-head game to go to look at as well, and yeah, they did not look very impressive. I tend to lean, based on what you said, towards the fact that yeah, maybe they're getting the kills, but they're not able to put it together, and that's the hard part. Getting the kills is the easy part. Putting it together is the part that requires teamwork, and yeah, and so I don't know, but I do think I had that stat there that Optic at 1.13 in search, Heretics is a 1 KD in search, despite Heretics having a slightly better search round win rate. And then if we look at control, they've got a 1.1 in control, despite being 4-2. Heretics has a 1.04, so a lower KD, and is 7-1 in control. I don't know. I tend to think here I really like Heretics plus 120 on map 1. I don't think that Optic should be big favorites here. They haven't really shown me much in Hardpoint that would make me think they should be such big favorites. But yeah, I don't know. Map 2 and 3, I'm just really torn, honestly.
I'm going back to the control on this one. And Robert, your point about if this wasn't Optic Texas, would they be a -188 favorite? I think there's no way they would be. Like, this game just happened, and we saw those other 3 games already happen, and the team that won is a sizable favorite in all of those. And this is the one where apparently the last match just doesn't matter. Now, Miami was a bigger underdog in that previous game, so they've shrunk the gap. But yeah, to me, this game is close to a toss-up, so I think there's value in Miami. You look at control, Miami has only lost once this year in that mode. They look really good. Optic are fine in that. Optic are like solid in every mode, but they don't really have anything that they are dominant at. So I think this will go back and forth. I think maybe the map vetoes play out a little differently. But to me, I have the most faith that Miami will just continue to win control. Or at least I don't like to take a +1.5 at -210, but they've been competitive all year in that mode. Yeah, it's Miami or nothing for me. I can't justify the Optic price here.
Yeah, I think one other note I was going to just made me think of it is we talk about Optic being a LAN team, like a team that is, yeah, they get, oh, they don't take it, not that they don't take it seriously online, but yeah, that like they are dominant on LAN and they have been in the past. I think it's important to note it's not like this Miami team is just like a bunch of rookies or something too. Like these guys have played together on LAN. Most of them, I think, other than Vickle, were on one of those Spanish heretic. Yeah, it was heretics back then too. Like playing on LAN in Columbus and at the majors is back in the CWL too. So it's not, I don't expect these guys to come out and be like nervous because they're in front of the Optic crowd or anything like that. Which like I would legitimately think that about, I don't know, yeah, like team like Carolina with younger players on it, or it's not anymore. They've planted their younger players, but yeah, I don't see that being a factor. I think this Optic is probably going to be very similar to the one we saw online. I don't think they're going to be playing against guys shooting circles because yeah, there's let's go Optic chants in the crowd or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the futures markets. We'll talk a little bit about the markets here. It's weird because you just for Call of Duty you just don't get the same prices you can get, at least not in this era, that you get with other futures markets here. Phase +137 to win. 55%, like there's like a 45% chance they win. Ultra +175. It's crazy. You look at that and you're like, baby, there's so little value on this board. And again, the drop off, right? We say, okay, we've been saying the top four. I'd throw Heretics in there as well. I actually think these two should be reversed at least, but whatever. Top 4 or 5, but then just a steep drop. Then it just falls like a stone. The books are basically just saying these guys are not winning the tournament, and it's just crazy that the level of it the tiers is just, it's nuts here. I don't know, like it's crazy that I'm looking at a +175 and being like there might be value there, but like at a certain point, like if you bet Ultra and then Ultra, like to reach the final, that's a horrible price. You don't, not at -150, but let's say you bet Ultra and then they stumble a bit, and they come back up. You have to sweat out the entire losers bracket run. Then you get to the final. Then okay, what's the price on Ultra? -120, -110. Like it's gonna be it's basically, this is basically implying like maybe a +120. So okay, so you'll be able to bet Toronto live at +120 when before you could have bet them at 175. Is that really value? No, not really, right? There's just so little value in betting any future here. I don't really see a point here. What do you guys think?
I
Go ahead,
agree
Ryan.
in large part. Usually Major 1 rolls around and there's something I'm interested in, but this is, yeah, maybe it's just the way the league is constructed right now. Where I see it, it's like we have two teams at the top that are justifiable, basically co-favorites. I know FaZe are they have a little more expectation on them, I guess, with the +137, but yeah, to me, it's like one of those teams is probably going to win unless we see something new from New York or Optic, or maybe Miami gets hot, something like that. Because, yeah, if you want to take Seattle or Rocker or Breach or any of those teams, it's basically a lottery ticket that you hope they get hot and maybe have a favorable path to the grand finals. Maybe those teams can somehow dodge having to play FaZe or Toronto for a couple rounds. And if that's the case, then good. But at that point, it's just a roll of the dice. Yeah, I don't like anything. The teams at the bottom are no interest because they're all very bad. But yeah, I think it's FaZe or Ultra or nothing.
I think the interesting thing, and so if you want to, if you don't mind going to the next slide too, because I think this slide is the most interesting one for sure, is just the way that I was running my simulation is just based on, yeah, basically it's market implied strength. So not only just from these games, but like looking at the historical data and weighting it a bit less heavily as others have done. And so I was surprised that the results of the simulation given that I did it right, I was telling you guys I had a bug yesterday because this was from last year, but given that I did it right, it's interesting that the market implied strength for FaZe, and then when I run them all the way through using their game level market implied strength, I run them through, I get them in the finals more often than, so I don't know, to me, and I would love to have this fact checked, but yeah, to me it seems like the market's implying that FaZe is stronger than they're giving them credit for to win outright. And that's an interesting spot to me. But as Robert said, do I think there's a ton of value betting FaZe plus 137 now when I can just bet it later? I don't really love it, but I don't know. It is an interesting dynamic to me because I've run this sort of simulation a lot in the past. And yeah, typically the strengths of the teams, like it's factored in pretty well the paths that they're going to have. But either FaZe has easier paths than the book is giving them credit for, or yeah, there's a bit of an incongruity between how strong they think they are relative to all the other teams and then the odds that they make the finals and win it outright. So I don't know. It's something I'm going to keep an eye on. I'm definitely going to run the code again, but I do like the numbers, and I do think that like basically the way that I simulate is I know what the head-to-head probability of every team beating every other team just in a matrix start, and then I'm drawing from that based on the actual shape of the bracket, and I sim through each round or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. I do all those head-to-head matchups ahead of time, so I'm surprised that I was really surprised to see how often FaZe was getting through, given how strong the market feels. Because yeah, and that's all to say. That's because the market thinks that FaZe is really strong, and we've talked about how we don't think maybe it's fair. Maybe they're not quite that strong. But I'm just surprised to see the market contradicting itself here.
Yeah, that's a good point. Robert, if you could go to the graph slide after this one, just to show, because we have the market odds at break even for each team. So that's the colored bar for each team line. The black bar is what I have that team winning at, and the gray bar is what Doug has. And we're not too far off in the fact that there's really two teams at this tournament that have a really good shot at winning, and everybody else is kind of there. Maybe they could surprise. Yeah, to me, based on the numbers I have, I do think Toronto right now is the best team in the game. I'm not willing to like take their futures market price because I don't think it's good anyway. But just the fact that they are so dominant in the game mode that we play the most just is huge for them. And I think FaZe will come back down to earth in that, because every game it seems like they're just squeaking out a win left and right. So if those teams were to match up, I think Toronto are sizable favorites in hardpoint. I think you have to lean FaZe and search, but again, that mode can go wonky at times. And then controls, I see these teams as basically even. The one thing FaZe has going for it, one, they're undefeated and they're very good. But two is the grand finals, you throw in an extra search and destroy, and right, this year, last year, the year before, that's FaZe's like bread and butter. That's what they go back to every time. So if they can get to the grand finals, maybe that gives them the edge over Toronto, just knowing that there's an extra search. But yeah, to me, I think Toronto Ultra, if there's ever a time before the hardpoint meta changes drastically, like the time is now for Ultra. So I got them favored in this one. But yeah, New York, Texas, Miami, maybe they could surprise. Everybody else is just there.
I think the graph shows, because yeah, I said before, my odds are based on the market implied power rankings or like strengths of the teams, and you can see there Miami, the market is just giving Miami no credit at all, and it's just funny. I like probably more where your odds are at there, but yeah, it's funny to see that sort of embodiment of what the market thinks about the teams outside the top four. It's just like, nope, there's no chance any of them will do anything. Yeah, we're destined for a FaZe Toronto final and just get used to it type of thing. Yeah, no, it's just an interesting chart. I like this.
Mm-hmm. And then our picks for the weekend. We also have Doug's picks in here as well. I've got Miami plus 1.5 versus Texas. Again, doesn't need to win, just needs to get it to. Actually, theoretically, they could 3-0 again, and that would still cash. But just basically win at least 2 maps. I've got Ultra hard point spread. Again, this is harder because we only have things from the first 4 games. And then I'm taking my pick number 3, which is my lowest pick. I'm gonna take a little piece of Ultra minus 2.5 against Surge. Those are my picks. CDLMetrics, you can go next. What are your picks?
Yeah, I'm with you on Miami. Like I said before, they're really good at control. Texas is a quality opponent, but we just saw them beat them in that mode like a week ago. So I like Miami there with you. I think can take a map off of FaZe. I think they were really close to doing that last time they met. I think this time they get it done. Maybe some different maps play into that, or maybe they just have luck on their side this time around. And then my last pick, I have my Minnesota Rocker as a pretty sizable underdog in control against New York, who have 2 control wins on the year so far. Yeah, that's where I'm going with mine. And Doug, what do you got?
Yeah, I have the same. I took the same LAG versus Atlanta, which I do think is good. I think we're all around this Heretics being better against Texas than the book is maybe giving them credit for. So I like map 2 here. I think that the way that Search has been playing, I think I think this is better than a 50-50 for Heretics probably. Honestly, since we've talked about it more, the like map 1s and 3s as well. But yeah, I think when I was thinking of these, I think map 2 makes sense too. And then yeah, New York minus 1.5 against Minnesota. I think that they can close this out 3-1. I don't know. I was a little bit lower on Minnesota personally. Again, having talked through this stuff it's incredible to be able to talk through this stuff. I don't normally get to do that. Now I feel like an idiot for thinking it, but at the time I'm not that impressed with Minnesota, and I think New York can get it done. They give them one mulligan. I think they can get it done still.
Fair. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so that's it for us. We'll be doing Major 2 Week 1 on Thursday, February 15th. So we're going to be gone for a couple weeks after this. And in the meantime, there will be a Super Bowl. So yeah. But yeah, we're going to, obviously, I think a lot of us, and probably a lot of people watching this are listening to this are football fans. Yeah, we'll be back at some point. And yeah, thanks for coming on, Doug. It's been a blast having you and talking about a lot of the advanced stats you're using, and hopefully that we'll be using in the future for better analysis of the CDL.
Yeah, no, appreciate you guys having me on. It's been really fun. Yeah, it's not something I get to do very often anymore now that I live in the corporate world or whatever and only get to post about stuff on Twitter. It's fun to, yeah, have conversations with real life human beings about esports.
That's true. Yeah. All right. See everybody. Good luck with your picks this weekend, and yeah, enjoy Major 1. See everybody.